It's religion and science living together on the same piece of cloth.
Ever since the Shroud first really appears in history, there's been controversy about it, and there have been questions about its authenticity.
What if one of the most mysterious artifacts in history was finally tested by modern science? And the result left scientists completely stunned. For centuries, the Shroud of Turin has puzzled historians, scientists, and believers alike. This ancient linen cloth is believed by many to be the burial cloth of Jesus, carrying the faint image of a crucified man. But the biggest question has always remained the same. Is it real, or is it a medieval creation? That's where Barrie Schwortz, the official documenting photographer of the famous 1978 Shroud of Turin research project, enters the story. When scientists began studying the cloth with advanced technology, they expected clear answers, but what they discovered only deepened the mystery. The image on the shroud wasn't painted. There were no pigments, no dyes, no brushstrokes. Even more shocking, when researchers attempted to analyze biological traces and possible DNA on the cloth, the results raised questions that science still struggles to explain. How could such a detailed image exist without any known artistic technique? Why does the image behave like a photographic negative centuries before photography existed? And what did the DNA tests actually reveal? In this video, we'll explore what Barrie Schwortz and scientists discovered while studying the Shroud of Turin, and why the results continue to challenge modern science and history. If you enjoy uncovering hidden mysteries and ancient discoveries, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more mind-blowing revelations. The Unexpected Journey of Barrie Schwortz. Barrie Schwortz was born in 1946 in Los Angeles and grew up in a Jewish family. Religion was never something that shaped his interests, and he certainly had no special curiosity about Christian relics or ancient mysteries. What truly fascinated him was photography, the science of light, the challenge of capturing perfect images, and the art of documenting reality with precision. By the 1970s, Schwartz had already built a strong reputation as a technical and scientific photographer. His work often involved complex subjects that required both skill and patience. From industrial environments to medical documentation, he became known for producing extremely detailed and accurate images. Then, in 1977, something unusual happened. A group of American scientists preparing to examine the Shroud of Turin invited him to join their research team. At first, Schwartz was skeptical. He assumed the cloth was probably just a medieval forgery or a religious curiosity. But while the mystery didn't interest him spiritually, the photographic challenge did. Capturing every experiment and every detail of such a historic investigation was an opportunity he simply couldn't ignore. So he agreed to become the official documenting photographer, responsible for creating the permanent visual record of the entire scientific study. The 1978 investigation, Science Meets the Shroud. The Shroud of Turin research project, STURP, assembled in 1978, was unprecedented. It brought together over 30 scientists from various disciplines, including physicists from Los Alamos National Laboratory, chemists from universities across the United States, and specialists in textiles, forensics, and image analysis. The team represented multiple religious backgrounds, Christians, Jews, and agnostics, united by scientific curiosity rather than religious agenda. In October 1978, they traveled to Turin, Italy, where the shroud was housed in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. For 5 days and nights, from October 8th to October 13th, they were granted unlimited access to examine the cloth using the most advanced scientific equipment available. What Schwartz witnessed during those 5 days would fundamentally change his understanding of the Shroud and eventually his entire worldview. A photographer who never expected to face a mystery. Barrie Schwortz was born in 1946 in Los Angeles and raised in a Jewish household. As a young man, religion was never the center of his world. Stories about Christian relics or ancient spiritual artifacts simply didn't capture his attention. His real passion was photography. He loved understanding how light behaves, how shadows reveal detail, and how a camera can capture moments that the human eye often misses. To Schwartz, photography was more than an art. It was a science. It required patience, precision, and a deep understanding of how images are formed. Over time, this dedication helped him build a strong reputation in the world of technical and scientific photography. By the 1970s, Schwartz had already worked on many demanding projects. His assignments were not ordinary photo shoots. Instead, he often documented complicated processes where accuracy was everything. He photographed industrial operations, delicate medical procedures, and technical environments where every detail mattered. In these situations, even the smallest mistake could lead to incorrect records. Because of this, people trusted him for his careful and methodical approach. His camera was not just a tool, it was a way of preserving truth. Then, in 1977, an unexpected opportunity arrived that would completely change the direction of his career. A group of American scientists was preparing to conduct the first large-scale scientific investigation of one of the most famous religious artifacts in the world, the Shroud of Turin. The research team needed someone who could carefully document every step of their work. That's when they approached Barrie Schwortz. At first, the invitation didn't excite him the way many people might imagine. In fact, he was extremely skeptical. To him, the Shroud was probably nothing more than a medieval creation, or perhaps a clever piece of religious art that had been misunderstood for centuries. He had no emotional or spiritual connection to the artifact, but something about the project still caught his attention. It wasn't the religious story behind the cloth. It was the challenge of documenting a historic scientific investigation. The idea of photographing advanced experiments, capturing detailed images of the cloth, and creating a permanent visual record of the entire process sounded fascinating. For a photographer who loved technical challenges, this was a rare opportunity. After thinking about it, Schwartz decided to accept the offer. His role would be simple in description, but extremely important in practice. He would serve as the official documenting photographer for the research team. Every test performed on the Shroud, every location where samples were examined, and every stage of the investigation would pass through his camera lens. His photographs would become the visual history of the project, an accurate record that future researchers could study for years to come. At that moment, Barrie Schwortz believed he was simply taking part in a scientific assignment. He had no idea that this decision would pull him into one of the greatest mysteries ever studied, a mystery that would challenge scientists, historians, and researchers around the world. The carbon dating debate. Barrie Schwortz's investigation into the Shroud of Turin took a dramatic turn in 1988. About 10 years after the major scientific study in 1978, the Vatican allowed a radiocarbon dating test to determine the age of the cloth. Small pieces of the fabric were removed and sent to 3 respected laboratories: Oxford University, the University of Arizona, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. When the results were announced, they created a global shock. All 3 labs concluded that the linen was produced sometime between 1260 and 1390 AD. According to that timeline, the cloth would be from the medieval period, more than 1,000 years after the time of Jesus. Many headlines immediately declared the mystery solved, calling the shroud a medieval forgery. For Schwartz and several other members of the earlier research team, the news was deeply frustrating because it seemed to conflict with many strange features they had already documented. As Schwartz later studied the details of the test, several important concerns appeared. The sample used for dating came from one small corner of the cloth. Ironically, that corner had the most complicated history. Over the centuries, it had been touched frequently, exposed to smoke and damage during a major fire in 1532, and possibly repaired using newer threads. Schwartz argued that such a location might not represent the age of the entire cloth. If repairs or contamination were present, the results could reflect the age of that corner rather than the original linen. Later, statistical reviews of the dating data suggested irregular patterns in the measurements, hinting that the tested fibers might not all have come from the same time period. Because of this, Schwartz concluded that the 1988 test dated that specific sample, not necessarily the whole shroud. And regardless of the date, one major puzzle still remains unanswered. How was the mysterious image on the cloth created? Even today, no experiment has successfully reproduced all of its unusual characteristics. Decades of careful research. After the famous Shroud investigation in 1978, Barrie Schwortz didn't simply walk away from the mystery. Instead, the experience slowly turned into a lifelong mission. Over the next several decades, he continued studying the shroud, collecting new information, and carefully reviewing every scientific paper that appeared about it. One of his biggest contributions was creating Shroud.com, a website that became one of the most trusted sources for reliable information about the Shroud of Turin. At a time when rumors and exaggerated claims were spreading everywhere, Schwartz focused on something different: facts. His goal was simple: provide clear scientific data so people could examine the evidence themselves. He spent years giving lectures, appearing in documentaries, and speaking at conferences around the world. What made him unique was his balanced approach. He spoke with believers, skeptics, historians, and scientists alike. No matter who he was talking to, he kept repeating the same idea. He would often say something like this: he was not there to tell people what to believe. His role was only to present the evidence. In his view, the shroud was already mysterious enough without adding personal religious interpretations on top of it. For more than 40 years, Schwartz maintained that careful, disciplined attitude. But in the early 2020s, new research appeared that forced even him to pause and reconsider some things. The DNA finding that sparked fresh questions. A new chapter in the Shroud story began in 2015, when Italian scientists studied tiny dust particles collected from the cloth during preservation work. Using laboratory tools, they extracted small fragments of DNA from those particles. Their aim was simple: find out what organisms had touched the cloth during its long history. What they discovered was intriguing. The samples contained human DNA, along with genetic traces from several types of plants. This hinted that the cloth may have traveled through different regions over time, possibly including parts of Europe and the Middle East. Still, the data wasn't clear enough to reveal a full story. Several years later, in 2022, another team of researchers revisited those same samples using much more advanced genetic technology. Modern sequencing tools are able to read DNA fragments with far greater accuracy than older methods. As they carefully analyze the genetic data, something unusual appeared. Some of the human DNA markers didn't match the patterns scientists usually see in known populations. Normally, genetic markers help researchers trace ancestry and migration. Over thousands of years, human populations developed identifiable genetic signatures linked to certain regions. But the DNA fragments from the shroud did not fit neatly into those familiar categories. The genetic material was clearly human, yet the mixture of markers looked unusual. Some sequences appeared related to ancient Middle Eastern populations, which could make sense historically. However, other markers seemed connected to distant populations that normally would not appear together in the same genetic profile. When Barrie Schwortz first heard about these findings in 2023, he reacted with caution. Studying very old DNA is extremely difficult. Samples can easily become contaminated by people who handled the cloth or by environmental exposure over centuries. However, after reviewing the researchers' methods, he acknowledged that the team had taken careful steps to avoid mistakes, including repeated testing and control comparisons. Even so, scientists remain cautious. The unusual DNA patterns might still be explained by contamination, degraded genetic fragments, or unknown ancient population variations. For Schwartz, the discovery didn't solve the mystery. It simply made the puzzle even deeper. Going public, a statement. 46 years in the making. When Schwartz agreed to go public with the DNA findings in early 2024, he knew the announcement would be controversial. He had spent 46 years building credibility as an objective researcher who presented evidence without pushing religious conclusions. At 78 years old, having devoted nearly half a century to studying the Shroud, he felt a responsibility to share what had been discovered, even if it raised more questions than it answered. Schwartz stated in a video released in March 2024, "I went to Turin in 1978 as a skeptic. I am still in many ways a skeptic. I question everything. I demand evidence. I do not accept claims without data. But after 46 years of examining this cloth, documenting every test, and analyzing every piece of data, I can no longer maintain that the Shroud is easily explained as a medieval forgery. The image properties do not match any known artistic technique. The 1988 carbon dating has unresolved methodological questions. And now this DNA analysis suggests whoever's blood is on this cloth had a genetic profile that is genuinely anomalous. I am not telling you this is the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. I am not making religious claims. I am telling you that the scientific evidence, physical, chemical, and now genetic, does not fit conventional explanations. Something about this cloth is extraordinary. We need to be honest about that, even if it makes us uncomfortable." The response was immediate and divided. Christian communities, particularly those who had always believed in the Shroud's authenticity, celebrated the DNA findings as vindication. Headlines in religious media proclaimed that science finally proved what faith always knew. But Barrie Schwortz pushed back. He said, "This does not prove religious claims. It proves the Shroud is anomalous. Anomalous is not the same as miraculous. We need more research, better sampling, and independent replication. What we have is fascinating data that raises profound questions. We do not have definitive answers." The scientific community was more cautious. Several geneticists who had reviewed the data acknowledged it was unusual, but argued the sample size was too small and the contamination risks too high to draw firm conclusions. They called for new sampling from different areas of the cloth and for more rigorous contamination controls. Skeptics pointed out that anomalous DNA results from ancient samples are common and usually turn out to be artifacts of degradation, contamination, or analysis errors. They argued that without independent verification, the findings should be treated as preliminary at best. But nobody could explain away all of the shroud's characteristics. The image properties remained unexplained. The formation mechanism remained unknown. The DNA added another layer of mystery. One historian noted that the shroud has been studied more intensively than almost any archaeological artifact. After all that study, we still cannot definitively say what it is, when it was made, or how the image was created. That alone is remarkable. A 5-day assignment that became a lifetime mission. Today, at the age of 78, Barrie Schwortz finds himself in a place he never expected. A Jewish photographer from Los Angeles has become one of the most recognized voices studying one of Christianity's most debated artifacts, the Shroud of Turin. What makes the story even more surprising is that he never planned for this path. When he first joined the investigation in 1978, he believed it would be nothing more than a short assignment. The research team was scheduled to study the cloth for only a few days, and his role was simply to photograph the process. In his mind, it was just another professional job. Take the pictures, document the tests, and then move on to the next project. But life had other plans. Those few days slowly turned into decades of study, lectures, and research. Over time, Schwartz became one of the most knowledgeable people in the world when it comes to the shroud. People often ask him a simple but powerful question. Do you believe the shroud is real? Do you think it actually wrapped Jesus? His answer is always calm and careful. He explains that he doesn't approach the subject through belief. Instead, he looks at the evidence. And according to him, the evidence is extremely unusual. The image on the cloth behaves like a photographic negative, something that was not even discovered until centuries later. The image also contains three-dimensional information that scientists can measure digitally. Even more puzzling, the image exists only on the very top fibers of the linen threads, and no paint, ink, or pigment has ever been found that could explain how it was created. According to Schwartz, these features are difficult to explain using both medieval techniques and modern technology. He is careful not to claim that the shroud is a miracle. Instead, he describes it in a different way. It is unexplained. After decades of examination by skilled researchers from many scientific fields, the object still raises questions that no one has fully answered. A call for deeper scientific investigation. Because of these unanswered questions, Schwartz believes new scientific studies are needed. For example, he supports performing a new carbon dating test, but this time using samples taken from the center of the cloth rather than from repaired edges. Testing several areas with different methods could help confirm more accurate results. He also encourages advanced DNA studies, focusing directly on the reddish stain areas while using strict contamination controls and modern genetic sequencing tools. Another area of interest is the formation of the mysterious image itself. Scientists could attempt new experiments to see whether any known process can recreate all the unusual features seen on the shroud. Finally, Schwartz suggests a complete modern chemical analysis using technologies that simply did not exist during the original 1978 investigation. In his view, today's scientific tools are far more powerful than those available decades ago. With the right access and proper funding, researchers may finally uncover answers that once seemed impossible to reach. Questions that go far beyond the shroud. The recent DNA findings connected to the shroud raise questions that reach far beyond the cloth itself. If those genetic fragments truly belong to one individual with an unusual ancestry pattern, it could challenge what scientists currently understand about ancient human populations. On the other hand, if the strange DNA signals were caused by contamination or damage from age, that would reveal something important as well. It would remind researchers how difficult it is to study extremely old biological samples and how careful scientists must be when interpreting genetic data from archaeological objects. And if the shroud truly dates back to the 1st century and once covered a crucified man from that time, the mystery becomes even deeper. Questions about history, faith, and identity would naturally follow. Barrie Schwortz openly admits he does not claim to have final answers. After decades of study, he simply points to the evidence: a measurable image, blood-like stains consistent with real blood, and data that remains difficult to explain. Whatever the final explanation may be, one thing is clear to him: this ancient cloth still carries a mystery that science has not yet solved. A mystery that still refuses to give simple answers. Barrie Schwortz never expected the Shroud of Turin to shape the story of his life. What began as a simple photography assignment slowly turned into a decades-long search for answers. When he first joined the investigation in 1978, he approached the cloth with the mind of a skeptic. To him, it was likely just another historical object that would eventually be explained by science. But the deeper he looked, the more questions appeared. Schwartz didn't begin this journey trying to prove religious claims. His job was simply to document the evidence. Yet the evidence itself turned out to be far more puzzling than anyone expected. The image on the cloth behaves in ways that researchers still struggle to recreate. The chemical properties of the stains resemble real blood. And now the recent DNA studies have introduced another layer of mystery. Some of the genetic signals discovered in those samples don't easily match known human population patterns. Scientists are still debating what that really means. The unusual DNA could be the result of contamination, damaged genetic material, or analytical limitations, or it might represent something scientists simply don't fully understand yet. For Schwartz, the key point is honesty. After more than 4 decades of research, he says the only responsible conclusion is that the mystery remains open. He openly admits he cannot say whether the shroud once wrapped Jesus or not. That question moves beyond photography and science into faith and belief. What he does know is that the cloth is far from an ordinary artifact. Even now, at 78 years old, Schwartz continues to study it, review new findings, and encourage further research. He understands that he may never see the final answer in his lifetime. But to him, that is not a reason to stop searching. Because sometimes the most important discoveries begin with a mystery that refuses to be solved. And the Shroud of Turin, whatever its true story may be, remains one of those mysteries that continues to challenge science, history, and human curiosity.